Welcome. You're here now, and there's nothing else you need to do. Let your shoulders soften. Let the thoughts slow down. You've carried enough for one day, and this time is yours. We're about to drift through the quiet past, a calm, slow journey through history, told gently so you can rest deeply. You don't need to remember the facts. You don't need to stay awake. Just let the words move like waves and settle into stillness. As we begin, Rome was born from myth and grown from survival. The story begins in 753 BCE, when Romulus is said to have founded the city on the banks of the Tiber River. Raised by a she-wolf alongside his twin Remus, Romulus would become the first of Rome's legendary 7 kings. Whether true or not, this founding myth set the tone for centuries of Roman identity, fierce, disciplined, and destined to rule. The early Roman kingdom was a collection of hilltop villages slowly merging into one society. The kings of Rome, ruling over the next 2 centuries, expanded territory, established religious institutions, and laid the foundations of Rome's civic structure. The last king, Tarquin the Proud, ruled with arrogance and cruelty. His expulsion in 509 BCE marked the beginning of the Roman Republic, a moment Romans would glorify forever. The early republic was not a democracy as we think of it. It was an oligarchy controlled by patricians, Rome's aristocratic class, while the plebeians, the common citizens, fought for representation. The government was anchored by 2 consuls elected annually, and the Senate, an advisory body made up of Rome's elites. Over time, political offices were open to the plebeians, but the path was slow and fraught with conflict. In 451 BCE, the 12 tables were created, a codification of laws displayed in the forum, so all citizens, rich or poor, could know their rights and duties. This was a crucial moment in Roman legal tradition, emphasizing order, predictability, and structure. As internal structures solidified, Rome's ambitions turned outward. Through alliances and wars, Rome gradually conquered its neighbors. By the early 3rd century BCE, Rome controlled most of the Italian peninsula. But power brings new enemies. Across the sea lay Carthage, a powerful city-state in North Africa, rich and dominant over Mediterranean trade. Between 264 BCE and 146 BCE, Rome and Carthage would fight 3 wars, the Punic Wars, that would decide the fate of the ancient world. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, was primarily a naval conflict over control of Sicily. Rome, initially inexperienced at sea, rapidly built a fleet and introduced innovations like the corvus, a boarding device that turned sea battles into hand-to-hand combat, something Romans excelled at. After 2 decades of conflict, Rome emerged victorious. Sicily became Rome's first province. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BCE, would make Carthaginian general Hannibal famous. After leading his army, including war elephants across the Alps, Hannibal delivered stunning defeats to Rome at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, where tens of thousands of Romans died. Yet Hannibal could never take Rome itself. Rome, refusing to surrender, raised new armies and adapted its strategy. Under the leadership of Publius Cornelius Scipio, Rome took the fight to Carthage itself. In 202 BCE, at the Battle of Zama, Scipio defeated Hannibal. Carthage's power was broken. In the Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE, Rome besieged Carthage. After brutal fighting, the city was destroyed, burned to the ground, its population killed or enslaved. Legend says the Romans salted the earth to prevent Carthage from rising again. Whether true or not, the symbolism was clear. Rome would not tolerate rivals. With Carthage gone, Rome expanded rapidly, absorbing Greece, parts of Asia Minor, and North Africa. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Rome controlled much of the Mediterranean, but external success hid internal decay. The Republic began to fracture under the weight of its own expansion. Wealth from conquests enriched a few while impoverishing many. Former soldiers, returning from war, found their farms seized by elites or neglected beyond repair. The urban poor grew restless. Attempts at reform were crushed. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, tried to redistribute land and restore dignity to the plebeians. Both were killed, martyrs of the widening gap between rich and poor. The army changed too. No longer composed strictly of citizen farmers, soldiers became loyal to generals who paid and fed them, not to the Senate. This shift would have fatal consequences. Gaius Marius, a brilliant general, opened the army to the landless poor and professionalized it. His rival, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, marched on Rome itself, twice seizing power by force. Civil war became a precedent. Rome's politics turned violent. Power struggles escalated. The Senate became a tool of whoever held the most force. The Republic was dying, slowly, inevitably. Then came Julius Caesar. Born in 100 BCE, Caesar rose through military and political ranks. Charismatic, ambitious and ruthless, he formed the first triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus, an informal alliance to dominate Roman politics. Caesar was given command in Gaul, where he waged brilliant campaigns from 58 to 50 BCE. He conquered vast territories and wrote detailed accounts of his victories, the commentaries on the Gallic War. These works glorified his image and kept him popular with the Roman masses. But his success made others uneasy. The Senate, prodded by Pompey, ordered him to disband his army. Instead, in 49 BCE, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his legions, an act of treason that triggered civil war. His words then were simple but legendary. The die is cast. Caesar marched on Rome. Pompey fled to the east. The war raged across Greece, Egypt, and North Africa. Eventually, Caesar defeated all opposition. He returned to Rome as dictator. His reforms were sweeping: calendar reform, debt relief, expansion of the Senate, and colonization for veterans. But his growing power alarmed the old guard. In 44 BCE, he was assassinated in the Senate by a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius. They claimed to be saving the Republic. Instead, they unleashed more chaos. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal ally, sought revenge, but Caesar had named an heir, Gaius Octavius, his grandnephew and adopted son. This young man would become Augustus. A new civil war erupted. Octavian and Antony defeated Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE. Later, tensions between Octavian and Antony, fueled by Antony's alliance with Cleopatra, led to another war. In 31 BCE, at the naval battle of Actium, Octavian crushed Antony and Cleopatra. The lovers fled to Egypt and died by suicide. Octavian returned to Rome alone and victorious. In 27 BCE, he was granted the title Augustus by the Senate. He was the first emperor of Rome. The Republic was over. The empire had begun. Augustus was a master of appearances. He preserved the illusion of republican rule while holding ultimate power. He called himself princeps, first citizen, not king or dictator. Yet he controlled the army, the treasury, and the Senate. His rule brought peace, the Pax Romana, a period of relative stability and prosperity that would last 2 centuries. Augustus reformed the military, the tax system, and civic administration. He beautified Rome, famously saying he found it a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He ruled for over 40 years and died in 14 CE. Power passed to his stepson, Tiberius. The age of emperors had truly begun. Tiberius, the stepson of Augustus, became the second emperor of Rome in 14 CE. Though he was a capable military commander and administrator, he was far less charismatic than his predecessor. His reign began in stability, but grew darker with time. Suspicious by nature, Tiberius increasingly withdrew from public life. He eventually left Rome altogether, retreating to the island of Capri where he ruled remotely. Under his later years, treason trials increased. Executions became common. Fear began to cloud the air in Rome. Upon his death in 37 CE, power passed to his grandnephew and adopted grandson, Gaius, better known to history as Caligula. At first, his rule was welcomed. He ended treason trials, recalled exiles, and granted bonuses to soldiers. But within months, his behavior shifted dramatically. Whether due to illness or unchecked power, Caligula descended into cruelty and madness. He declared himself a living god, humiliated senators, and wasted imperial funds on extravagant games and monuments. At one point, he is said to have considered appointing his horse, Incitatus, as consul, a story often repeated to illustrate his instability. His reign lasted just 4 years. In 41 CE, members of the Praetorian Guard, his own imperial bodyguards, assassinated him. It was a brutal end, but it marked the first time Rome had witnessed the violent removal of an emperor. After the chaos, the guards declared Claudius, Caligula's uncle, as emperor. Claudius was an unlikely choice. He had a limp, a stammer, and had been largely dismissed by the royal family. But beneath the awkward surface was a thoughtful, scholarly mind. He stabilized the empire, expanded bureaucracy, and oversaw the conquest of Britannia, a significant addition to Rome's provinces. Claudius also undertook public works, building roads, aqueducts, and new harbour facilities. But his personal life was marked by betrayal. His fourth wife, Agrippina the Younger, manipulated him into naming her son, Nero, as his successor. Claudius died in 54 CE, possibly poisoned by Agrippina to speed her son's rise. Nero became emperor at the age of 16. In the early years, he was guided by the philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus. These advisors kept Nero's worst impulses in check. The empire functioned. But as he grew older, Nero turned toward indulgence, spectacle, and cruelty. He fancied himself a poet, an actor, and a charioteer. He spent lavishly and ruled erratically. In 64 CE, a great fire swept through Rome. Much of the city burned. Rumors spread that Nero had started the fire himself, perhaps to clear space for his grand architectural visions. He deflected blame onto the Christians, a small, obscure sect at the time, and initiated the first Roman persecution of them. Christians were tortured, burned, and killed in public spectacles. Nero's popularity plummeted. Revolts broke out in the provinces. Eventually, even the Senate turned against him. Facing certain death, Nero fled Rome. In 68 CE, he took his own life. His final words, according to tradition, were, "What an artist dies in me." His death ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty and triggered a year of civil war. In 69 CE, 4 men would claim the throne in quick succession: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian. This period, known as the Year of the Four Emperors, tested the limits of Roman unity. Battles were fought, alliances shifted, and legions declared loyalty to rival claimants. Vespasian emerged victorious. He was a soldier, practical and no-nonsense. His reign marked the beginning of the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian focused on restoring order, rebalancing finances, and rebuilding Rome. He began construction of the Flavian amphitheatre, better known today as the Colosseum. When he died in 79 CE, his son Titus succeeded him. Titus had military credentials, having led the Roman forces during the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE. That siege ended with the destruction of the Second Temple, a traumatic moment in Jewish history. As emperor, Titus surprised many. Despite early criticism, his short reign was marked by generosity and compassion. During his rule, a massive eruption of Mount Vesuvius destroyed the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Later, a fire ravaged Rome. Titus provided relief efforts and did not raise taxes, a decision that earned him admiration. He died suddenly in 81 CE. His brother Domitian succeeded him. Domitian ruled for 15 years. He strengthened the economy, revalued currency, and defended the empire's borders. But his autocratic style and paranoia grew with time. He demanded to be addressed as Lord and God, marginalized the Senate, and revived treason trials. Executions resumed. Informers flourished. In 96 CE, Domitian was assassinated in a palace conspiracy. The Senate condemned his memory, a practice known as damnatio memoriae. Statues were destroyed. His name was erased from inscriptions. With Domitian's death, the Flavian dynasty ended. The Senate appointed Nerva as emperor. He was elderly and had no army backing, but he acted as a transitional figure. He adopted Trajan, a respected general, as his heir. This began a period of stable and wise leadership, later called the era of the 5 good emperors. Trajan ruled from 98 to 117 CE. He was a soldier emperor and expanded Rome to its greatest territorial extent. His conquest of Dacia, in modern-day Romania, brought immense wealth into the empire. He built public works, including Trajan's Forum and Trajan's Column, monuments still standing today. His governance was marked by tolerance, infrastructure, and inclusion. He is often remembered as one of the greatest Roman emperors. His adopted son, Hadrian, succeeded him. Hadrian shifted focus from expansion to consolidation. He withdrew from overextended fronts and fortified borders. Most famously, he built Hadrian's Wall in Britain, a 73-mile-long stone barrier marking the northern limit of Roman control. Hadrian was a lover of Greek culture, art, and architecture. He travelled extensively throughout the empire, inspecting cities and provinces, often wearing local dress and living among the people. He also faced challenges. Jewish revolts in Judea broke out during his reign. His suppression was harsh. The city of Jerusalem was rebuilt as a Roman colony, and the province renamed Syria Palestina. Hadrian ruled for over 2 decades. His chosen successor, Antoninus Pius, brought stability and peace. His reign, from 138 to 161 CE, is remembered for its calmness. There were no major wars. He governed with fairness and restraint. Temples were restored, infrastructure maintained, the treasury remained strong. When Antoninus died, power passed to his adopted son, Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher-emperor who wrote meditations in Greek during military campaigns. His reign was marked by both wisdom and hardship. The empire faced invasions from Germanic tribes and a devastating plague. Marcus Aurelius ruled with stoic resolve. He is often idealized as the last of the good emperors. His writings, known as meditations, survive today as a cornerstone of Stoic thought. When he died in 180 CE, he broke with precedent by passing power to his biological son, Commodus. That decision would have consequences. Commodus took the throne in 180 CE, following the death of his father, Marcus Aurelius. It marked a turning point in Roman history. For the first time in nearly a century, power passed by blood rather than adoption based on merit. Commodus, young and self-indulgent, lacked the discipline and wisdom of his predecessors. His reign would unravel the stability built by the 5 good emperors. Though the early years of his rule were guided by competent advisors, Commodus quickly shed restraint. He fancied himself a living god, often appearing in public dressed as Hercules, wielding a club and wearing a lion's skin. He participated in gladiatorial games, not as a sponsor, but as a combatant, demanding victory and public adoration. The imperial treasury suffered under his extravagance. He renamed months after himself. Statues and inscriptions were altered to reflect his self-glorification. Rome's administration fell into the hands of corrupt favorites and freedmen, while real governance eroded. Eventually, even his inner circle grew tired of the chaos. In 192 CE, Commodus was assassinated, strangled by a wrestler in his bath as part of a palace conspiracy. His death ended the Nerva-Antonine dynasty and ushered in another period of civil war. The following year, 193 CE, became known as the Year of the 5 Emperors. Pertinax was the first to be declared emperor by the Senate, but his attempts at restoring discipline angered the Praetorian Guard. After just 3 months, he was murdered. The guard then auctioned off the throne to the highest bidder. A wealthy senator named Didius Julianus bought their loyalty. His rule was short and deeply unpopular. Meanwhile, in the provinces, rival generals declared themselves emperor: Septimius Severus in Pannonia, Pescennius Niger in the east, and Clodius Albinus in the west. Septimius Severus marched on Rome, executed Julianus, and took control. Over the next several years, he defeated his rivals and established the Severan dynasty. He reformed the military, increased soldier pay, and elevated the role of the army in political life, changes that would reshape Roman power structures permanently. Severus died in 211 CE during a campaign in Britain. His final words to his sons were pragmatic: enrich the soldiers and ignore everyone else. His sons, Caracalla and Geta, inherited the empire jointly, but not for long. Caracalla quickly had Geta assassinated and ordered a brutal purge of his supporters. Thousands died. He then ruled alone, focusing on military campaigns and personal legacy. In 212 CE, he issued the Constitutio Antoniniana, granting Roman citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire, a move designed as much to increase tax revenue as to promote unity. Caracalla also built the Baths of Caracalla in Rome, a massive public bathing complex that survives in ruins today. But his cruelty and paranoia deepened. In 217 CE, while traveling through the East, he was assassinated by a soldier in his own guard. The Severan dynasty stumbled forward through short reigns and assassinations. Macrinus, Elagabalus, and Alexander Severus followed. Each faced mounting instability, military discontent, and declining control. By the mid-3rd century, Rome entered one of its darkest periods, the crisis of the 3rd century. From 235 to 284 CE, Rome experienced near-constant upheaval. Emperors rose and fell with alarming speed. Most died violently, by assassination, battle, or betrayal. More than 20 emperors reigned in just 50 years. Civil war was constant. External threats grew stronger. Germanic tribes pressed from the north. The Sassanid Persians challenged Rome in the east. The economy collapsed. Hyperinflation ran rampant. Cities decayed. Plague swept through the population. For a time, the empire even fractured into separate states, the Gallic Empire in the west and the Palmyrene Empire in the east. Rome seemed on the verge of disintegration. But from this chaos emerged a stabilizing figure, Aurelian. Aurelian ruled from 270 to 275 CE. A skilled general and strict reformer, he reconquered the breakaway Gallic and Palmyrene territories, restoring unity. He fortified Rome with a new defensive wall, parts of which still stand today. He reformed the currency and curbed corruption. Though his reign was brief, he was assassinated by his own officers. It marked the beginning of a slow recovery. Eventually, in 284 CE, a capable and ambitious general named Diocletian took power. His rule would fundamentally reshape the empire. Diocletian realized the empire was too vast for one man to govern. In 293 CE, he established the Tetrarchy, a system of 4 rulers, 2 senior emperors, Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, Caesars. Power was divided between East and West, allowing for more responsive governance. He strengthened the army, reorganized provincial administration, and introduced sweeping economic controls to combat inflation. He also launched the empire's last and most severe persecution of Christians, attempting to enforce traditional Roman religion across all provinces. In 305 CE, Diocletian did something no Roman emperor had done before. He voluntarily abdicated. He retired to a palace in modern-day Croatia to grow cabbages. His co-emperor, Maximian, also stepped down. But the Tetrarchy soon unraveled. Ambition, rivalry, and dynastic claims led to civil war once again. Amid the turmoil, one figure rose to prominence: Constantine. Constantine, son of Constantius, a former Caesar under the Tetrarchy, emerged as a powerful military leader in the West. He fought a series of battles to secure control of the empire. The most decisive came in 312 CE at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. On the eve of that battle, Constantine is said to have received a vision, a cross of light in the sky and the words, "In this sign, conquer." The next day, his army fought under a new symbol, the Chi-Rho, representing Christ. Constantine won. He became the sole ruler of the West, and eventually of the entire empire. His reign would leave a permanent mark on history. In 313 CE, Constantine and his eastern co-emperor Licinius issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance throughout the empire. Christianity, once persecuted, was now legally protected. Over time, Constantine increasingly favored Christianity, building churches, granting privileges to bishops, and involving himself in doctrinal debates. In 325 CE, he convened the First Council of Nicaea, a gathering of bishops that produced the Nicene Creed, a foundational statement of Christian belief. Constantine also restructured the military and bureaucracy, but perhaps his most enduring act was the founding of a new capital, Constantinople. Built on the site of ancient Byzantium, Constantinople was strategically located and richly adorned. It became the new center of imperial power in the East, while Rome's political significance diminished. When Constantine died in 337 CE, he was baptized on his deathbed, a Christian emperor at the end of a long transformation. The empire he left behind was religiously altered, politically restructured, and increasingly oriented toward the East. After the death of Constantine the Great in 337 CE, the Roman Empire entered a new phase of power sharing and family rivalry. Constantine had divided the empire among his three sons, Constantine II, Constans, and Constantius II. Each inherited a region. Constantine II ruled the western provinces of Gaul, Britain, and Spain. Constans took Italy, Africa, and the Balkans, and Constantius II governed the eastern provinces, including Asia Minor, Egypt, and the rich cities of the Levant. This tripartite division did not last peacefully. By 340 CE, Constantine II, believing himself entitled to more, marched against his brother Constans in Italy. He was ambushed and killed in battle near Aquileia. Constans took over his brother's territories and became ruler of the entire western half of the empire. But his rule, marked by favoritism and accusations of indulgence, bred discontent. In 350 CE, a general named Magnentius rose in rebellion and overthrew Constans. Constans fled, only to be captured and killed. Magnentius then declared himself emperor, prompting Constantius II, still ruling the East, to respond. The empire was once again in civil war. Constantius marched west, and after 3 years of conflict, he defeated Magnentius at the Battle of Mursa Major, one of the bloodiest battles in Roman history. Tens of thousands died, including many experienced Roman soldiers. By 353 CE, Constantius II was the sole ruler of the empire. He had survived his brothers and his rivals, but he inherited an empire exhausted from civil war, financially strained, and religiously divided. Like his father, Constantius was a Christian, but he favored Arianism, the belief that Jesus Christ was subordinate to God the Father. This doctrine had been condemned at the Council of Nicaea decades earlier, but still had strong support in parts of the empire. Constantius enforced religious policy with severity. He convened councils, exiled bishops, and attempted to unify the empire under his preferred theology. Meanwhile, pagan temples continued to lose imperial favor, and the divide between traditional Roman religion and Christianity grew ever wider. Despite his religious focus, Constantius recognized the growing threats at the frontiers. In 355 CE, he appointed his young cousin Julian as Caesar and sent him to govern the troubled western provinces. Julian had been raised as a Christian, but was secretly devoted to Neoplatonic philosophy and the classical Roman tradition. Julian proved to be an unlikely success. In Gaul, he defended Roman cities from Germanic invasions, defeated the Alemanni at the Battle of Argentoratum, and won the admiration of both the army and the citizenry. His leadership was energetic and reform-minded. He cut through corruption, lightened taxes, and encouraged a return to traditional Roman virtues. In 360 CE, as Julian's popularity grew, the Western army, perhaps fearing Constantius's jealousy, proclaimed him Augustus, an equal emperor. A civil war loomed again, but Constantius, now ill, died in 361 CE before conflict broke out. On his deathbed, he recognized Julian as his rightful successor. Julian entered Constantinople to a cautious but hopeful reception. Now sole emperor, he revealed his religious convictions and immediately set about reversing the Christianization of the empire. He reopened pagan temples, reinstated traditional sacrifices, and declared religious tolerance. But his tolerance had limits. He withdrew state support for Christian churches, excluded Christians from teaching classical literature, and sought to marginalize their influence in public life. Julian envisioned a revival of classical Roman religion, supported by a morally reformed priesthood, infused with philosophy and civic virtue. He wrote treatises, restructured pagan worship, and surrounded himself with scholars and sages. In 363 CE, Julian embarked on a bold military expedition against the Sassanid Persian Empire, seeking to match the conquests of Trajan and restore Roman dominance in the east. He marched deep into Persian territory, winning initial skirmishes and pressing toward the capital. But the campaign bogged down. Supplies dwindled. The Persians avoided open battle and harassed Roman lines. In a sudden engagement near Samarra, Julian was mortally wounded, struck by a spear in the side. He died without naming a successor. Legend says his last words were a bitter farewell to the gods he had tried to restore. "Thou hast conquered, Galilean," he is said to have whispered, acknowledging the irreversible rise of Christianity. The army, now stranded deep in enemy territory, quickly elevated a Christian officer named Jovian as emperor. Jovian negotiated peace with the Persians, surrendering some territory to save his men. Though criticized for the concessions, the treaty allowed the army to withdraw safely. Jovian ruled only briefly. After returning to the empire, he died in his sleep in 364 CE, likely from accidental carbon monoxide poisoning in his tent. He left no heir. In his place, senior officers selected a capable general named Valentinian, who then appointed his brother Valens as co-emperor. The empire was once again divided. Valentinian ruled the west, and Valens the east. Valentinian I was a seasoned commander and devout Christian. He took the defense of the empire seriously, reinforcing borders and repelling invasions along the Rhine and Danube. He was stern, often ruthless, but committed to order. He tolerated religious pluralism to a degree and is remembered for his pragmatic leadership. His brother Valens, ruling from Constantinople, faced growing pressure from the east, both from the Sassanid Empire and from the mounting presence of migratory tribes beyond the Danube. These pressures would come to a head in a crisis that would shake the empire. In 376 CE, tens of thousands of Visigoths, fleeing the advancing Huns, requested asylum within Roman borders. Valens agreed, allowing them to cross the Danube and settle in Thrace. But the local Roman officials, corrupt and unprepared, mistreated the refugees. They extorted them for food, sold their children into slavery, and withheld basic necessities. Tensions exploded. The Visigoths, desperate and betrayed, rebelled. They began raiding towns and fortresses, striking back against their Roman hosts. In 378 CE, Valens, eager for a quick victory and reluctant to wait for reinforcements from the west, marched out to confront the Gothic army near Adrianople. His forces met the Visigoths on open ground, unaware that the full Gothic cavalry had not yet arrived. During the battle, the Gothic cavalry emerged from hiding and attacked the Roman flanks. The result was a catastrophe. The Roman army was encircled and annihilated. 2/3 of the eastern legions were destroyed. Valens himself perished. His body never recovered. The Battle of Adrianople was one of the worst defeats in Roman military history. More than a military loss, it marked a turning point. For the first time, the empire had failed decisively against a migrating group within its own borders. The psychological blow was deep. Rome was no longer invincible. In the aftermath, the empire scrambled to recover. Gratian, the Western emperor and son of Valentinian III, appointed a new leader for the East. Theodosius, a general from Hispania with a reputation for competence and discipline. In 379 CE, Theodosius became emperor of the East, tasked with rebuilding shattered forces and restoring imperial authority. Theodosius quickly recognized the limitations of brute force. Rather than continue the war endlessly, he negotiated with the Gothic leaders. In 382 CE, he signed a treaty allowing the Visigoths to settle within Roman territory as federates. They would retain their own leaders, laws, and customs, but in exchange, they would provide military service to the empire. It was a practical solution, but a dangerous precedent. The Roman army would now contain large groups loyal not to Rome itself, but to their tribal leaders. The integration of foreign peoples into the Roman world, once carefully controlled, was now becoming necessary for survival. Theodosius focused not only on security, but also on religious policy. A devout Nicene Christian, he sought to unify the empire under Orthodox Christianity. He passed laws banning pagan rituals, closed temples, and criminalized sacrifices. Public pagan worship effectively ended under his reign. The empire that had once tolerated all gods now acknowledged one. In 390 CE, a riot in the city of Thessalonica resulted in the death of a Roman official. Theodosius, enraged, ordered a brutal reprisal. His troops massacred thousands in the city's arena. The incident shocked even his supporters. Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, demanded the emperor repent. In a public act of humility, Theodosius donned sackcloth, fasted, and knelt in penance. He ruled both halves of the empire briefly after the death of Valentinian II, uniting East and West one final time. In 395 CE, Theodosius died, dividing the empire between his two sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. That division would become permanent. The Roman world had changed. What remained was no longer a single empire. It was two empires, culturally distinct, administratively separate, and facing very different futures. In 395 CE, with the death of Theodosius I, the Roman Empire was split for the final time. His son Arcadius inherited the eastern provinces, ruling from Constantinople, while his younger son Honorius was given control of the Western Empire, with his court based in the city of Milan. Though they wore the imperial title as equals, the reality was quickly apparent. The East was strong, wealthy, and defensible. The West was vulnerable. Honorius was only 10 years old when he became emperor. Real power fell into the hands of the general Stilicho, a capable half-Vandal military commander who had served Theodosius loyally. Stilicho effectively governed the Western Empire, defending its frontiers and managing complex relationships with barbarian groups that were growing increasingly restless along the Rhine and Danube frontiers. The most immediate threat came from the Visigoths, led by Alaric. Though once settled as federates within the empire, they had grown frustrated by broken promises, lack of pay, and the erosion of their legal status. In 395, shortly after Theodosius's death, Alaric began a series of raids throughout the Balkans, demanding land, payments, and recognition. For over a decade, Alaric moved across Roman territories, bargaining, retreating, attacking again. The court at Ravenna, where Honorius later relocated for safety, treated him alternately as an enemy and as a negotiator. Stilicho attempted diplomacy, at times paying off Alaric, at other times preparing to face him in battle. But court politics interfered. In 408 CE, Stilicho was accused of treason and executed, largely due to palace intrigue and xenophobic distrust of his Germanic background. With Stilicho gone, Alaric faced a weakened, divided leadership in the West. That same year, Honorius refused Alaric's demands for land and compensation. In response, the Visigothic army marched on Italy. On August 24th, 410 CE, Alaric and his troops entered the city of Rome. The Eternal City, unconquered for 800 years, was sacked. For 3 days, Visigoths looted homes, took prisoners, and stripped sacred temples. Though some churches were spared and widespread slaughter was avoided, the symbolic impact was seismic. Rome, the center of the world, had fallen, not to a rival empire, but to a people it once called barbarians. The shock echoed across the empire. Pagan writers saw it as punishment for abandoning the old gods. Christians framed it as a trial of faith. Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, began writing The City of God in response, a monumental work that reshaped Christian thought for centuries. Alaric died shortly after the sack. His followers moved into southern Gaul and later settled in Hispania. Meanwhile, the Western Empire struggled to recover. Honorius continued to rule in name, but the provinces were slipping away. In Britain, Roman rule had grown weak. Local leaders, faced with Pictish and Saxon raids, requested aid from the imperial court. No help came. In 410 CE, Rome formally advised the Britons to defend themselves. The Roman legions withdrew, and Roman Britain collapsed into fragmented rule, marking the beginning of what would become Anglo-Saxon England. In Gaul, Germanic tribes, including the Franks, Vandals, Suebi, and Alans, began crossing the Rhine in large numbers. The Roman army, stretched thin and lacking leadership, could not stop them. Cities fell. Settlements were seized. Roman landowners struck deals with invaders to preserve local order. Authority was fragmenting. Throughout the 5th century, the Western Empire endured in name, but decayed in function. Emperors rose and fell, many puppets of powerful generals, many unable to travel beyond their court walls. Ravenna remained the Western capital, protected by marshes, but increasingly irrelevant as real power shifted elsewhere. One of the last truly capable leaders of the West was Flavius Aetius. A Roman general of partial Scythian descent, Aetius navigated alliances, hired mercenaries, and held the western provinces together by sheer force of will. He is best remembered for confronting Attila the Hun. Attila, ruling over a vast confederation of Hunnic tribes, launched repeated raids into Roman territories. In 451 CE, he invaded Gaul. Roman and Visigothic forces, under Aetius and King Theodoric I, met Attila's army at the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains. The battle was brutal and indecisive, but Attila retreated. It was the last great Roman military victory in the West. The following year, Attila invaded Italy, sacking cities and marching toward Rome. Legend says Pope Leo I met Attila and persuaded him to withdraw, perhaps through diplomacy, perhaps through promises of payment, or the visible threat of famine and disease in the region. Attila died in 453 CE. The Hunnic Empire fragmented soon after, but Rome's problems remained. In 454 CE, Aetius, once called the last of the Romans, was assassinated by Emperor Valentinian III, who feared his growing power. A year later, Valentinian himself was murdered by Aetius's loyal officers. What followed was a carousel of emperors, none lasting long, none restoring order. In 455 CE, Rome was sacked again, this time by the Vandals. Led by King Genseric, the Vandal navy sailed from North Africa and entered the city unopposed. The sacking lasted 2 weeks. Though more systematic than Alaric's invasion, the Vandals looted extensively, carrying treasures, prisoners, and artworks back to Carthage. The word vandalism would later emerge from this event, though the destruction was likely less chaotic than the name suggests. By the 460s, most of the Western Empire had been carved up by barbarian kingdoms. The Visigoths ruled much of Gaul and Hispania. The Vandals controlled North Africa. The Ostrogoths were emerging in the east. Roman legions were composed largely of mercenaries, often Germanic themselves. The old structures of senate, city magistrates, and centralized taxation were crumbling. In a desperate attempt to restore order, the Eastern court in Constantinople sent Anthemius, a respected senator, to rule the West as emperor. He formed alliances with local powers and even led a campaign against the Vandals in Africa. But the invasion failed. Anthemius was overthrown in 472 CE. The last emperor of the West came a few years later, Romulus Augustulus. He was a teenager, placed on the throne by his father Orestes, a military commander. In 476 CE, a Germanic general named Odoacer, once an officer in the Roman army, led a revolt. Orestes was captured and executed. Romulus Augustulus was deposed and sent into retirement. No bloodbath, no final battle, just an end. With his fall, the Western Roman Empire officially ceased to exist. The imperial regalia was sent to Constantinople. The emperor in the east, Zeno, acknowledged Odoacer as ruler of Italy, not as emperor, but as a king. The age of Roman rule in the West was over, but the empire itself did not vanish. In the East, the Roman Empire continued, wealthy, populous, and organized. Based in Constantinople, it would survive for nearly 1,000 more years, evolving slowly into what modern historians call the Byzantine Empire. The Eastern emperors still saw themselves as Roman. They governed with Roman law, wrote in Greek and Latin, and maintained many of the same administrative systems established centuries before. They built churches, palaces, aqueducts, and walls. The spirit of empire endured. During the late 5th and early 6th centuries, the Eastern Empire stabilized under leaders like Anastasius I and later Justin I. But it was Justinian I, ruling from 527 to 565 CE, who would revive the Roman dream most fully. Justinian sought to reconquer the lost western provinces, codify Roman law, and restore the grandeur of the empire. His general Belisarius reclaimed North Africa from the Vandals, pushed into Italy against the Ostrogoths, and even advanced into parts of southern Spain. Justinian also oversaw the construction of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, one of the most iconic churches in human history. He reorganized imperial law under the Corpus Juris Civilis, a legal code that would influence Europe for centuries. Yet even in triumph, the empire faced limits. The reconquests were costly. Plagues ravaged the population. Enemy forces pushed back. The old western provinces, once ruled from Rome, were no longer sustainable as Roman territory. Justinian died in 565 CE. His successors would defend what remained. The Byzantine Empire, as it came to be known, weathered centuries of challenge: Persian wars, Arab invasions, religious disputes, and internal decay. Rome, as a city, faded into history. Its senate dissolved. Its monuments collapsed or were repurposed. But its legacy lived on, in language, in law, in architecture, in memory. Even after the fall, people spoke of the Roman Empire not as something gone, but as something sleeping, waiting, echoing through time. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, the eastern half stood alone. But it did not fall. It adapted. Centered in Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire would endure for nearly 1,000 more years. It preserved much of the old Roman administration, law, and imperial identity, but it also changed. Greek slowly replaced Latin as the dominant language. The old pagan traditions faded into memory, replaced by Orthodox Christianity. The empire remained Roman in name and law, but the world around it had shifted. Modern historians call it the Byzantine Empire, but its people never used that word. To them, they were still Romans. The Emperor Justinian I, who ruled from 527 to 565 CE, is often seen as the last true Roman emperor in the old mold. He dreamed not just of stability, but of restoration, of a united Roman Empire stretching from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. He was devout, ambitious, and tireless. One of his most enduring achievements was legal. Justinian ordered a complete overhaul of the sprawling, often contradictory mass of Roman laws and edicts. The result was the Corpus Juris Civilis, or body of civil law. It organized centuries of legislation into a coherent system and became the foundation for legal systems across Europe. Even today, echoes of Justinian's code can be found in modern civil law. Justinian also left his mark on the physical world. In 532 CE, after a violent riot known as the Nika Revolt threatened to destroy Constantinople, he crushed the rebellion with force. Thousands died in a single day. In the aftermath, he rebuilt the city. At the heart of this effort was the Hagia Sophia, a church of such scale and beauty that it awed all who entered. Its massive dome, golden mosaics, and vast interior space became symbols of imperial and divine power. But Justinian's ambitions extended far beyond city walls. He launched military campaigns to reclaim the former western provinces, sending his general Belisarius to North Africa, where he defeated the Vandals with swift precision. The Roman banners once again flew over Carthage. Then came Italy. The Ostrogoths ruled there, but Belisarius fought his way through, capturing Rome and Ravenna in a brutal, grinding war. Later, in southern Spain, another campaign brought parts of the peninsula back under Roman rule. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the empire might rise again, whole and united. Yet these victories came at a cost. The wars drained the treasury. The army was stretched thin. In 541 CE, a plague swept through the empire, what would later be known as the Plague of Justinian. It decimated the population, disrupted agriculture, and shattered the economy. Entire cities emptied. Recovery took decades. Justinian died in 565 CE, having spent nearly 40 years on the throne. His efforts to rebuild the Roman world left a deep legacy, but the gains in the West were fleeting. Within a generation, most of the reconquered lands were lost. Italy fell into chaos. North Africa was beset by rebellion. The dream of restoration gave way once more to survival. In the centuries that followed, the Byzantine Empire faced continuous threats. In the east, the Persian Sassanid Empire remained a formidable rival. In the west, new Germanic kingdoms took root and expanded. In the 7th century, a new force emerged from Arabia, Islam. The Arab conquests reshaped the map of the Eastern Mediterranean. In a matter of decades, Islamic armies swept through Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and North Africa. Great cities like Antioch and Alexandria, once jewels of the Roman world, fell under new rule. The Byzantines fought desperately to hold their ground, but their empire was shrinking. And yet, they endured. The capital, Constantinople, proved impregnable. In 717 CE, during a massive Arab siege, the city's defenders unleashed a secret weapon, Greek fire. This flammable liquid, sprayed from ships and ramparts, ignited on contact and could burn even on water. It terrified enemy fleets and helped preserve the city through multiple sieges. Internally, the Byzantine Empire transformed. Emperors reorganized the administration into military districts called themes. These allowed for more local defense and better resource management. The old senatorial elite faded, replaced by provincial generals and administrators. The religious character of the empire deepened. Orthodox Christianity became not just a faith, but a core of identity. The emperor was seen as God's representative on earth, guiding both state and church. In 726 CE, a controversy erupted that would divide the empire. Emperor Leo III issued a decree against the use of icons, religious images of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and the saints. He saw them as idolatrous and dangerous. Iconoclasm, as it became known, led to the destruction of sacred images, the persecution of monks and artists, and fierce resistance from regions like Greece and Italy. This struggle over images lasted more than a century. It created rifts within the empire and between the Eastern and Western churches. Eventually, icon veneration was restored, but the scars remained. Despite these internal struggles, the Byzantines adapted. In the 9th and 10th centuries, under emperors like Basil I and Basil the Son, the empire entered a period of revival. Territory was regained, the economy stabilized, and culture flourished. Byzantine art, architecture and theology reached new heights. The empire began to influence its northern neighbours, including the Slavs and the Bulgars. In 988 CE, the Grand Prince of Kiev, Vladimir I, converted to Christianity, choosing the Orthodox tradition of Constantinople. His baptism and marriage into the imperial family marked the beginning of Byzantine influence in Russia and Eastern Europe. It was a soft empire now, less expansionist, more cultural, but no less potent. Back in the West, the memory of Rome lingered. The city of Rome itself remained under papal control, and the Pope grew increasingly independent. In 800 CE, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne, king of the Franks, as Emperor of the Romans. This act created a rival Roman Empire in the West, what would become known as the Holy Roman Empire. The Byzantines rejected this title. To them, the emperor in Constantinople was the only true Roman ruler. But the reality was clear. The Roman idea had outgrown its birthplace. It had splintered and spread into the Latin West, the Orthodox East, and the Islamic South. By the 11th century, new pressures arose. The Seljuk Turks advanced from the east, threatening Byzantine holdings in Anatolia. In 1071, the Battle of Manzikert was fought, a catastrophic defeat for the Byzantines. The Turks captured Emperor Romanos IV and soon overran much of the empire's heartland in Asia Minor. In desperation, the emperor called for help. His plea reached the Pope in Rome, and in 1095, the First Crusade was launched, not to save Byzantium, but to reclaim the Holy Land. Western European knights marched through Constantinople and eventually captured Jerusalem. For a time, Byzantium benefited from the movement, but the relationship between East and West was strained. In 1204, it broke completely. During the Fourth Crusade, Western armies, diverted from their original mission, turned against Constantinople. They besieged and sacked the city, looting its treasures, desecrating its churches, and tearing apart its palaces. The capital of the Roman Empire, untouched for nearly a millennium, was brought to its knees not by Persians, Arabs, or Turks, but by fellow Christians. A Latin empire was established in its place, ruled by Western knights. The Byzantine court fled to exile. For over 50 years, Constantinople remained in foreign hands. In 1261, the Byzantines retook the city, but the empire never recovered its former strength. What remained was a shadow, rich in culture and memory, but diminished in power and territory. Through the 14th and 15th centuries, the Ottomans rose. They advanced steadily through Anatolia and the Balkans, surrounding the crumbling Byzantine territories. One by one, cities fell. Trade declined. The population shrank. Constantinople, still glorious in its churches and walls, became an island in an ocean of enemies. In 1453, the end came. Sultan Mehmed II, a brilliant and ambitious leader, led an army of over 80,000 men to the gates of Constantinople. He brought massive cannons, some of the largest ever built, designed to breach the Theodosian walls that had protected the city for nearly 1,000 years. Inside, Emperor Constantine XI prepared for the final defense. He had only a few thousand soldiers, including foreign mercenaries and devoted citizens. They held the walls for weeks. But on May 29th, the city was breached. Constantine died in battle, his body never found. The city was overrun. The fall of Constantinople marked the end of the Byzantine Empire and the end of the Roman Empire. But Rome never truly died. Its laws shaped Europe. Its language seeded Italian, French, Spanish, and more. Its buildings inspired cathedrals. Its empire, fragmented and reborn, carried its memory across centuries. And through every stage, kingdom, republic, principate, tetrarchy, division, collapse, rebirth, siege, and fall, it endured longer than any imagined it could. Because Rome was never just a city. It was never only an empire. It was an idea, a way of order, of memory, of ambition, of identity. An empire that still echoes through the ruins, through the languages, through the names on our maps, and the stories we tell ourselves about what came before. This was Rome. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 marked the final breath of Roman political sovereignty. With its great walls breached and its churches silenced under the call to prayer, it would be easy to believe that Rome had finally ended. But Rome did not die in fire. It dissolved into thought. What had once been empire and infrastructure would now become myth, foundation, and memory. It would continue in the way cities were planned, how justice was measured, how power was shaped, and how identity was constructed. From the ashes of Byzantium, Rome would not vanish. It would disperse into the bloodstream of the world. The story of this dispersion begins with the Renaissance. Italy, where Rome had once ruled with marble and sword, became the first to feel its return, not in law or in armies, but in longing. The intellectual class of Florence, Venice, and Naples found themselves surrounded by the fragments of a civilization that had promised order, clarity, and beauty. They walked among fallen columns and broken statuary. They copied the faded inscriptions on tombs and triumphal arches. And they asked a question that would reshape the world. What if we had never lost this? In Florence, the poet Petrarch climbed the heights of Mount Ventoux with a copy of Augustine's Confessions, but it was Cicero who whispered in his ear. He mourned the collapse of Latin eloquence and believed that Rome's fall had ushered in a dark age, not merely of empire, but of language, virtue, and thought. He called for revival, not of imperial ambition, but of Roman clarity, Roman discipline, and Roman dignity. Others took up his call. Humanists began combing monastic libraries for forgotten scrolls. They uncovered dusty manuscripts containing Livy's accounts of early Rome, Tacitus's biting commentary on imperial corruption, and Vitruvius's instructions for building in harmony with nature and proportion. The arts followed swiftly. Donatello carved saints with the weight and musculature of Roman heroes. Botticelli filled his canvases with Venus and Mars, clothed in the quiet confidence of classical balance. And then came Brunelleschi, who travelled to Rome to study its architecture firsthand. He measured the Pantheon, sketched the ruins, and returned to Florence to construct the dome of the Santa Maria del Fiore, not as a replica, but as a declaration. The Roman mind had returned. This was not imitation. It was re-inhabiting. Michelangelo stood beneath the Sistine ceiling and painted prophets and patriarchs with the torsos of Roman gladiators. Raphael placed Plato and Aristotle beneath arches modelled after ancient basilicas. Their patrons, the Medici and the popes, adorned themselves in the robes of senators and built libraries in the proportions of the Roman Forum. But it was not just art. The revival extended into civic life. Florence experimented with republics. Venice stabilized its merchant rule with elected councils. Across Italy, thinkers like Leonardo Bruni and Lorenzo Valla argued for virtue, for civic participation, for a life modelled on the Roman ideal of civitas. Citizenship not merely as a legal category, but as a calling. And then came Machiavelli. In his discourses on Livy, he dissected the Roman Republic with the eye of a surgeon. He admired its ability to grow while maintaining internal checks. He warned of the dangers of wealth without responsibility, of military command without civic virtue. He wrote not to praise the past, but to instruct the future. In Rome, he saw not nostalgia, but a pattern of strength built on adaptation and decline brought on by complacency. As the Renaissance spread beyond Italy, so too did Rome. In the courts of France, scholars translated Latin treatises into the vernacular. Monarchs like Francis I filled their halls with Roman busts, not only for decoration, but as claims to lineage. Even as kings solidified their control, they wrapped themselves in the robes of Caesar, styled their palaces with the symmetry of Vitruvius, and issued laws drawn from Justinian's code. In the universities of Spain, Portugal, and the Holy Roman Empire, the Corpus Juris Civilis was taught alongside scripture. Law students learned not just rules, but philosophy. The Roman idea that justice was not arbitrary, but derived from reason, precedent, and the dignity of persons. This foundation would soon serve a new age, the Enlightenment. In the salons of Paris and the academies of Berlin, Rome became both guide and warning. Montesquieu studied its history and declared that the best governments balanced monarchic, aristocratic, and democratic principles, just as Rome had before the Caesars. His ideas would shape revolutions. In England, Edward Gibbon penned The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, a 6-volume meditation not just on history, but on human nature, institutional fragility, and the consequences of unchecked power. He traced the steps from republic to empire to collapse, offering not judgment, but a kind of grim reverence. In America, Rome was more than reference. It was blueprint. The Founding Fathers saw in the Roman Republic a mirror. They read Cicero, memorized Tacitus, debated the merits of consuls versus executives, senates versus monarchs. They saw in Cincinnatus a model for George Washington, the man who would lead the army to victory and then surrender power willingly. They chose Latin mottos, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. Annuit coeptis, he approves of our undertakings. Senatus populusque Americanus was never used, but the form was there, SPQR reborn in marble, if not in inscription. The Capitol dome rose above Washington, D.C., styled after St. Peter's in Rome, which itself had been built on Roman bones. The structure of the U.S. Constitution, divided power, checks and balances, time-bound offices, was a direct echo of Roman magistracies, and it was not only in the United States. The French revolutionaries overthrew a monarchy and declared a republic. They staged festivals with Roman costumes, renamed the months, and built temples to reason modelled after Roman design. They saw Brutus not as a traitor, but as a liberator. But in both cases, the arc of Roman imitation twisted. Napoleon crowned himself emperor, not with humility, but with spectacle. He marched through Paris beneath arches he had constructed in the style of Titus. He wore laurel wreaths, commanded armies with Roman standards, and even attempted to codify law in a form that echoed Justinian's. The Napoleonic Code would spread across Europe and remain the legal foundation of many nations to this day. Later in the 19th century, the British Empire looked to Rome not as a republic, but as an administrator of order. British historians saw the empire as a moral burden, the white man's burden, as Kipling would later phrase it, to bring roads, law, and civilization to the world, just as Rome had done with aqueducts, legions, and Latin. They built train stations with Corinthian columns, laid out cities on Roman grids, and governed colonies with bureaucracies organized along Roman lines. But they also feared the Roman fate. They debated whether the empire could last. They wrote books on Rome's decline, wondering if the signs were repeating. In Russia, the Roman echo took a different tone. After the fall of Constantinople, the Orthodox Church crowned Moscow the Third Rome. The title Tsar, derived from Caesar, became more than royal. It was sacred. The Russian emperors claimed to inherit both the spiritual authority of Byzantium and the secular strength of Augustus. And across Europe, classical education remained the standard. Boys were taught Latin before they learned science. They memorized speeches from the Senate floor. They read the Aeneid as both literature and moral compass. Rome had become a shared language of the elite. But as the 20th century approached, the shadow of Rome began to shift. The early fascist movements of Italy and Germany embraced Rome not as republic or philosopher king, but as spectacle. Mussolini had streets cleared to expose ruins. He erected monuments to victory. He revived the Roman salute and planted Roman eagles on government buildings. The fasces, an ancient Roman symbol of unity through authority, was placed behind the speaker's podium in the United States Capitol, where it still remains, even though its meaning has been obscured by fascist appropriation. In Germany, Hitler echoed Roman imagery in architecture, military uniforms, and ceremonial pageantry. He held parades modelled on Roman triumphs. The eagle, the arch, the torchlight processions, all drawn from an imperial past twisted toward terror. These regimes fell, but the question lingered. Could Rome's legacy be separated from its collapse? By the mid-20th century, a new Rome had emerged, not imperial, but symbolic. The United States, having helped end World War II and establish global institutions, was dubbed a superpower. Pundits asked, was America the new Rome? The comparisons were everywhere. A vast economy, military bases across the world, cultural dominance, internal debates about liberty versus control, expanding rights for citizens, expanding decadence in entertainment, bread and circuses, citizens disengaged from civic life, political corruption, wealth inequality, infrastructure aging, moral decline. Were these parallels real or projections? Historian after historian weighed in. Some saw a cyclical fate. Others rejected the metaphor. But Rome lingered not because the world wanted its failure, but because the world needed its memory. Every time power consolidates or frays, Rome rises again, not to march, but to remind. Even today, Rome is everywhere, though often hidden in plain sight. Its influence shapes not just nations, but minds. The words we use, the structures we inhabit, the way we understand power, order, decay, all carry traces of Roman architecture, law, and story. In law schools, Students still learn Latin phrases, habeas corpus, prima facie, mens rea, subpoena. These are not relics. They are the living bones of a system that traces back to Roman jurisprudence, where law was written, debated, and argued in public, not left to divine decree. City streets in Paris, London, and Washington are built in grids inspired by Roman camps, rectangular, structured, practical. Civil engineers design with symmetry and permanence because Rome taught the value of the straight road, the stone bridge, the arch that bears weight. Modern republics, from India to Brazil, carry constitutions, legislative assemblies, and electoral procedures that echo Rome's balance of power. Senators still convene, tribunes still advocate, and when governments fail, critics still warn. This is how the republic dies. Even outside politics, Rome persists in metaphor. Hollywood films like Gladiator, Spartacus, and Ben-Hur bring back the empire in colour and scale. But more than entertainment, these films play on something older, our fascination with power, honour, betrayal, and fate. When we watch Caesar cross the Rubicon or the mob cheer in the Colosseum, we are not just watching history, we are watching ourselves, projected backward. Rome is invoked in boardrooms and in therapy. The Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, have re-emerged in the modern world not as museum pieces, but as guides. Their words are quoted in corporate meetings, personal journals, and mental health podcasts. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. The obstacle is the way. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. These are not motivational slogans. They are echoes of Roman endurance, adapted for a world that still grapples with uncertainty, pressure, identity, and loss. And yet, there is something deeper beneath all of this. Rome offers not just systems or sayings, but a mirror. When we look at Rome, we are looking at a version of ourselves stretched across centuries. We see ambition and vanity, progress and collapse, structure and rot. We see how a society can build aqueducts and arenas while ignoring the cracks in its own soul. We see how citizens can become spectators, how power can become theatre, how liberty can be traded for comfort. These patterns do not belong to Rome alone, but Rome gave them shape, once, vividly, undeniably, and that shape endures. Every time a politician is compared to a Caesar, every time a nation is said to be in decline, every time we wonder if the centre can hold, Rome is there, not in judgment, but in reflection. And this is perhaps the final gift of Rome, the reminder that even the most advanced, admired, and expansive civilizations are made of people, flawed, hopeful, distracted, noble, short-sighted, brave. Rome was never a machine. It was a mosaic. It was senators arguing on marble floors. It was engineers laying stone across rivers. It was mothers raising children in apartment blocks. It was slaves building temples. It was generals dreaming of glory. It was philosophers writing by candlelight. It was bakers, priests, prostitutes, poets, students. It was a city, a system, a symbol, and now a shadow that never fully disappears. Even today, in the digital age, we reference it. A failing app is called late-stage Rome. A city overwhelmed by traffic is a modern empire in decline. An overambitious startup is trying to build Rome in a day. We still speak of crossing the Rubicon, of someone fiddling while Rome burns. of bread and circuses, of et tu, brute. These are not ancient phrases. They are modern vocabulary, coded with layers of meaning, shaped by a world we've never seen, but feel like we've lived. And maybe we have, because Rome never truly ended. Its empire collapsed, its emperors fell, its legions scattered. But its laws, its roads, its stories, its metaphors, they became part of everything that followed. You live in a world that still walks its roads. The fonts you read, the architecture that surrounds you, the courtrooms you see on television, the ideals of citizenship, of equality under law, of written constitutions, all of it carries the imprint of Rome. And so as the day fades, as thought slows, as your breath deepens, know this: Rome was not a mistake. It was not a single moment. It was not merely a power that rose and fell. It was a long lesson, taught in stone and silence, about what it means to build something meant to last, and to ask quietly, what will last of us? Tonight, that question doesn't need to be answered, only held gently as you drift. Let the noise of empire go quiet now. Let the marble cool. Let the streets empty. Let the torchlight fade from the arches. Sleep now. You have walked far through history, and Rome will wait.